The world is facing an unprecedented hunger crisis, and the United Nations says young children are among the most vulnerable. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, known as UNICEF, says nearly 2 million children who are severely malnourished are at risk of dying because of funding shortages for therapeutic food. UNICEF is appealing to member countries for an additional $165 million to treat children in countries spiraling from conflict, economic shocks, and climate crises. Joining us now from New York is Narayan. She's a senior advisor on child nutrition for UNICEF. Anu, thanks so much for joining us. There are certainly major challenges with food security around the world, and of course there's been a warning from UNICEF that 12 countries in Africa and South Asia are in danger of running out of food, specifically these ready-to-use therapeutic food known as RUTF. What exactly is RUTF, and why is it so critical for children?
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing attention to this important matter. Ready-to-use therapeutic foods are foods that are specially designed to treat children who are already severely malnourished, which means that their risk of mortality is extremely high. And these foods are designed in a way that can allow children to recover at the pace that they needed, with the micronutrients and the support that is necessary, so that we can sort of help them come back from the brink of death. And they are very critically important, particularly in places where health services can be severely lacking, so that we can give these foods and put it in the hands of mothers and children, so that they can be sort of brought back from the risk of death that they are facing.
Right, and what's causing the shortage of these types of food right now? Is it a question of cost, or is it logistics, or is it manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, 2024 has been a sort of an unprecedented year in sort of looking at the levels of food crises around the world. I mean, given Sudan, given the aspects that we're seeing in Gaza, the number of crises that we're seeing across the Sahel. So this is not an issue of only about supply. It's really about starting from an issue of funding and funding resources, particularly as a number of crises are both intensifying and are increasing. I think we find ourselves as one of the different United Nations agencies responsible for treating children with wasting, with facing sort of funding shortages. RUTF also has a bit of it takes a bit of time for production and for delivery, but in this particular instance, the gap that we're really highlighting is one of funding and the necessary resources, so that we can get the supplies in place for children.
Right, and if we look at the areas most affected right now by hunger, the Food and Agricultural Organization, as well as the World Food Programme, they put out a joint report in which they said, and I'm quoting here, it said acute food security is set to increase in both magnitude and severity across 22 countries. There are 5 countries that are of particular concern, and those countries are Haiti, the Palestinian occupied territories, Sudan, South Sudan, and Mali. What can you tell us about the food shortages in these areas?
So all of these countries, other than the situation in Gaza, you will see overlap with the countries that we've also identified in our report. In many of these countries, there is active conflict, which has also really reduced our ability to deliver assistance where needed. So access to humanitarian assistance has been severely restricted. And that also causes us problems in reaching women, children, and their families at the right time in the places that are closest to them. Some of these countries have been facing, for Mali, for example, is also facing climate shocks. So, and these have sort of long-term detriment in terms of the level of food production that they can do, the livelihoods that people can have, and people might be displaced. So on top of that, when you do have active conflict, I think it's the sort of the double whammy of all these conditions coming together that have resulted in these 5 countries being identified as at severe risk of food insecurity. And that's also where we are seeing a large number of children at risk of acute malnutrition and wasting that we are discussing here today.
Right, and if we look at Gaza specifically, which is occupied by Israel, in July, the United Nations warned of famine in Gaza. 96% of the population there already in danger of starvation, and another 50,000 malnourished children require immediate medical intervention. What can you tell us about the situation in Gaza, where the crisis is man-made because a lot of the aid shipments to that territory has been blocked?
Yeah, I mean, the situation in children in Gaza has been, I think it's, unprecedented is a sort of, I think we need stronger words than that. They've suffered tremendously over the past year. A place where we really never saw acute malnutrition at all. We didn't see children with wasting. We now have significantly large number of children at risk of wasting and requiring ready-to-use therapeutic foods to help them from dying. We have had challenges in making sure that our aid shipments are getting to children where it's much needed. I think there will be, we've made repeatedly asked for a ceasefire that can be lasting, so there can be humanitarian access that can be provided, and foods can be available, food, water, shelter can be made available to children as needed. And we remain extremely concerned about these children.
And looking at parts of Africa, there was a report that was issued by the United Nations. That report is called The State of Food Insecurity and Nutrition in the World. Africa is considered the worst affected region, with 1 in 5 people facing hunger and more than 1 in 2 people eating less or nothing for days at a time. You mentioned climate change a moment ago, and I'm wondering, to what extent is climate change adding to the crisis? I mean, we're seeing these reports that La Nina is changing rainfall patterns, for instance, and how does it affect the production and supply of food? You also mentioned Mali, where there's already been severe flooding.
Yes, so with climate change, there is obviously unpredictability in terms of weather patterns. It has resulted, as I said before, in terms of displacement, severe heat waves, or the loss of crops in some instances, loss of livelihoods, loss of animals if you're a pastoralist community. So. And when that happens, sometimes that can also add sort of the risk of conflict. So there is, with climate change, when your current patterns of production, of food production, or your livelihoods is changed, and then there is also displacement, and on top of that, there might be conflict as a result of fewer and fewer scarcer resources. These are the factors that really we find are driving food insecurity and acute malnutrition, particularly among children. In the global report on food crisis, which is also something that UNICEF participates in, we did indicate that conflict, displacement and climate change remain the 3 major drivers of acute food insecurity among children. And, we had a period when hunger was actually on the decline, but I think through COVID and post-COVID, we've actually seen an uptick again. This doesn't mean that we don't know what to do. So, in 2023, UNICEF was also able to treat over 5.3 million children across all these African countries and in some parts of South Asia. So with the resources and when given access, we are able to demonstrate that we can actually reach children where they need help. What becomes a challenge is humanitarian access when there is active conflict, as we're seeing in many places.
Right.
And also when there is a lack of funding, often because the needs become so much.
My thanks to Narayan with UNICEF. Now, the United Nations says the occupied Palestinian territories, Sudan and South Sudan, Mali and Haiti are among the top 5 places facing acute food security in the coming months, and in Gaza especially, where war has blocked delivery of much needed aid over the past year, the UN points to an enduring risk of famine. Well, for more on the impact of global food shortages on children, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Sonoma, California, Todd Evans is the founding director of the End World Hunger Foundation, and Dr. Mustafa Barghouti is the president of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society and founder and leader of the Palestinian National Initiative. He joins us from Madrid. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Mustafa Barghouti, let me start with you. The UN World Food Programme says the humanitarian crisis in Gaza could very soon escalate into a famine if no action is taken. In October, Gaza only received 5,000 metric tons of food. That's just 1/5 of basic food assistance for the occupied territories, 1.1 million people. These food shortages are, of course, affecting entire populations, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of families. But what is the impact on children?
The impact is horrible. This is the worst man-made humanitarian disaster caused by the Israeli genocide that is practiced in Gaza at the moment. The Israeli army is blocking all access to proper food, to sanitation, to hygiene, to medications and proper medical care. And in particular, now the northern part of Gaza is under complete siege for the last 33 days, and families and children are starving there, literally. The effect on children is tremendous. Not only about 17,500 children have been killed because of Israeli bombardment, but many other children have died because of starvation and malnutrition. And as you know, when children have malnutrition, their immunity goes down, and then they are bound to get sick from different diseases. Our medical teams in Gaza tell us that on average, every child gets sick 3 times a month, including respiratory infections, gastroenteric infections, which can be horrible, or other infections like skin diseases. We had 112,000 cases of infectious hepatitis in Gaza. We started to see poliomyelitis. As a matter of fact, there were 7 cases. 1 was proven. The 6 others are being investigated. But even when UNICEF and the WHO started a campaign for vaccination of children, Israel blocked the vaccination, the second round of vaccination now in the north. So, in my opinion, Israel is causing death of children through bombardment first, but also through some sort of biological warfare and even chemical warfare, because so much bombardment has happened in Gaza. You are talking about at least 85,000 tons of explosives that were thrown on Gaza. Yeah. We have depleted uranium there, other chemicals. It's a very clear case of a savage approach to the lives of children in Gaza.
Okay, joining us now from Texas, Raj Patel is a research professor at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, Austin, and a member of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. Raj, thanks so much for joining us. There was a report from the United Nations Trade Development that says that between 80 and 96% of Gaza's food production, which includes livestock, farms, orchards, and storage facilities, have been completely destroyed by Israel. The UN estimates it would take decades to rebuild. What is your assessment of the food situation in Gaza?
Well, I'm afraid I have to concur that the situation is going to be dire for decades to come. Merely having to regrow the food and find land, clear the land in order to be able to farm it again is one issue. But we're talking about children being experiencing hunger. These children are going to be the future farmers on that land, and they will carry with them the trauma not only of the war and the bombardment in their bodies, but it'll also be an issue of the malnourishment and the stunting that will last with them for decades. Through this really concentrated and prolonged denial of adequate food and calories, what we're seeing is what's technically called catastrophic famine. And you might think catastrophic just means really quite bad, but actually it has a definition where between either two adults or 4 children are dying a day from hunger. And what we're seeing is in many areas and in many households this level of catastrophic famine. And the problem is that even if we just imagine winter coming, things are going to get worse. We already saw a record low amount of food available coming into the area, and over the course of the coming months, we can imagine, and we're already seeing polio as the previous guest mentioned, but the long-term recovery from this is going to be desperately difficult.
Todd Evans, good to see you as well. As we've heard, the world is off track when it comes to eliminating hunger and malnutrition. What is your organization seeing when it comes to malnutrition among children?
Well, end world hunger does not work at a macro level of solving the dire situation of starving children. We have a village-to-village approach, and we identify places in the world. I have been in Mali, and we are related to a village there, where there is a great deal of interest in farming, and where I've seen success as far as malnutrition in children is when a health clinic or a health worker works with a village and helps the mothers and then in some cases the fathers to understand what is good nutrition. And in an example in Guatemala, that there is testing of children in the villages, and as well, the families are encouraged to grow their own food. Now, I know that sounds like irrelevant given the maximum magnitude of the issue that the other speakers have been talking about. But nevertheless, it's a drop in the bucket, maybe you'd say, but it works. And I kind of visualize that. I'm thinking long-term that a village-to-village approach is the best to deal with these issues. In Rwanda, the Gardens for Health combines with the health clinics, and they're supported by the government. And all of the education on nutrition and gardening and the various foods that are healthy are channeled through the clinics, and the training of the people are done by health workers. So when I think of the issue long term, it seems to me that is a sustainable approach. As far as what the previous speakers have been talking about, it seems like the United Nations needs to publicize and our UNICEF in dramatic ways what is happening, and seek to raise the funds to do that, to make an impact, so that the RUTs are available, and something is being done in these desperate situations.
Dr. Barghouti, Israel's parliament, the Knesset, recently voted to outlaw the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. This is one of the best-known UN agencies that have been working with Palestinians. It's been there since 1949. It's known by its initials, UNRWA. When the Knesset passed that legislation, this is how the organization's spokesperson, James Elder, responded. Let's listen.
If UNRWA is unable to operate, it'd likely see the collapse of the humanitarian system in Gaza. UNICEF would become effectively unable to distribute life-saving supplies. Here I'm talking vaccines, I'm talking winter clothes, I'm talking hygiene kits, health kits, water and sanitation, RUTF on malnutrition, and we know, again, we're knocking on the door of famine, and all range of nutrition supplies. So a decision such as this suddenly means that a new way has been found to kill children.
So, Dr. Barghouti, the Israeli parliament could also be violating international law. UNRWA was founded by a resolution that was passed by the General Assembly in December of 1949. Philippe Lazzarini, who is the Commissioner General, is calling on member states to intervene in what the Israeli government is now trying to do. But could you give us some idea of the work that UNRWA does and what would happen if it is banned?
Well, let me remind you that UNRWA was created to take care of Palestinian refugees, who were 70% of the Palestinian people who were displaced by Israel in a terrible catastrophe of ethnic cleansing, which took place in 1948, when Israel destroyed to the ground and eliminated 520 Palestinian communities and villages. And these people who became refugees had to be taken care of by UNRWA till they are allowed to return to their homeland, which never happened. UNRWA is the largest provider of humanitarian aid in Gaza, mainly because 70% of the population of Gaza are refugees since 1948. And UNRWA is the main health provider, the main medical provider. It is the main provider of education to children, and it was the main provider of social welfare to millions of children. Half of the population of Gaza, which is 2.3 million, are children. And now stopping the work of UNRWA means completely suspending the most important humanitarian operation that is working in Gaza in terms of provision of food, in terms of provision of assistance, in terms of provision of medical care, of medications, of vaccination, of everything. Without UNRWA, other UN agencies cannot work because UNRWA is the backbone for the humanitarian assistance in Palestine. Even non-governmental organizations like ours, Palestinian Medical Relief Society, which is the largest second provider after UNRWA actually, cannot function without the help of UNRWA. Right. And that's why I think this decision of the Israeli government is actually a decision to contribute to genocide of children in Gaza.
Yeah. Todd Evans, what kind of impact is climate change having on the availability of food? And you know, you were telling us a moment ago that you have been in West Africa. There are countries there which have faced severe flooding. 55 million people are facing food shortages because of that.
Who are you addressing on that question?
Todd, that's you. Yeah.
Hello?
Can you hear me, Todd?
Yeah, I didn't know who you were addressing.
No, yes, I was addressing
so
it to
the question is the effect of climate change. Well, yes. It certainly is huge, and I don't think it's you want in this program to go really depth, find out what is being done, and each government has its own responsibility for climate change. I guess I would hold up one little act that my son is involved in, and that is cook stoves. Up Energy is a company that makes in Uganda 20,000 cook stoves per month. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is, and it's being spread now into other countries in Africa, right. Is a rocket stove that is fed by partly charcoal and partly other food igniting thing. Right. And it's a very economical kind of stove. And now the people are not going out and having to cut down trees and what we call cooking their pot over 3 rocks. Right. And a fire underneath. Okay. So not only is it efficient and seems to be working, but it reduces the asthma in huge degrees, deaths by asthma. Okay. Because it limits the amount of smoke that goes into the air. Yeah, I'm running out of time. I want to get to Raj Patel very quickly in the few minutes we have left. Raj, one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is to create a world free of hunger by 2030. How realistic is that? And what happens if they don't meet those goals? Is there a plan B?
Look, the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, were an expression of the kinds of people we wanted to be in 2030, and the kinds of political commitments that we were ready to make in order to ensure that there would be, for example, a Sustainable Development Goal number 2 suggests a world without hunger. We are very far from being able to achieve that. The current trajectory suggests that there will be still hundreds of millions of people who are in conditions of undernourishment, which means that over the course of the year, they will have every day of that year fewer calories than they need in order to be able to survive. So there is no plan B, because it was, there was always an intention that we would mobilize enough political will in order to be able to get rid of the hunger. And I mean, the tragedy of this conversation is that we sort of know what to do, and we can figure out stoves, and we can figure out a bunch of other things. But the fact is that we, as a society, have decided that it's much more important to wage war and to spend, the US spends roughly, if you include everything in, $1 trillion a year on war, whereas we know what to do to stop hunger. And if we stopped spending on war for just 2 weeks, that would be enough money to be able to end hunger. And that's, if we undertake that every day, if we undertake a 50 billion spend every year until 2030, we can end hunger. And the travesty is we've chosen not to.
Yeah, that's an important question you raised, the fact that countries like the United States and its partners in Europe as well are able to find money for war, but not for people who are hungry. I mean, what does that tell you about the kind of priorities that the world has right now, especially in the developed world?
Well, I mean, it's obviously ludicrous, and I think that that's, it reflects very poorly that, even if you look at the sort of the commitments to being able to end poverty by 2030, another Sustainable Development Goal. You know how much the International Development Agency, the concessional loan bit of the World Bank, has spent since it was formed, I think 60 years ago. Right. It's about between 500 and 600 million dollars, billion dollars, and that's it. It's not nearly enough money, and right. I think what this reflects is, the absence of political will.
Right. Okay. I have to end it there. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.